David Brown was the son of a poor family. At 17, he moved to a large city center and began working in construction. 6 years later, he married on a proposal. Despite their best efforts, they had no children. In the years that followed, he failed at every job. His relationship with his wife also deteriorated. His only solace was alcohol, football, and gambling all his money illegally. He believed that one day life would smile upon him and his luck would change, but it didn't. On a cold October night, he was brutally murdered, leaving behind a bitter life filled with unfulfilled dreams that never would be realized. That night, at 2:50 a.m., a woman called, crying, reporting that her husband had been murdered. David Brown, 45 years old. The report came from his wife, Emily Brown. Chief Inspector George, observing the weather, realized that rain could start at any moment and wash away the evidence. They had to be quick. He immediately instructed the crime scene investigation team to conduct a rapid scan and collect everything they found. The chief inspector went to speak with Emily. The woman was distraught. Wearing her nightgown and the blanket the police had given her, her eyes were swollen from crying, and she stared blankly at the spot where her husband had died.
Actually, wounds speak. Forensic experts understand their language. The location, number, color, width, length, depth, and angle of the wounds all tell a story. That's why chemists and physicists examine the wounds, taking samples from within and around them. These examinations determine what caused the wounds, when and how they were inflicted. They can also reveal the number of attackers. Furthermore, it can determine whether the injury was a murder, an accident, or a suicide.
The chief inspector approached the woman and began to speak with her. He knew it was difficult for her, but she had to explain. Emily said she had heard a noise during the night and gotten up to look out the window. Someone was in the garden. There were many burglaries in their neighborhood. She immediately woke her husband and told him that someone was in the garden. Her husband quickly got out of bed, looked out the window, and then grabbed his stick and ran into the garden. Emily hadn't seen the faces of those in the garden. It was very dark, and she was terrified. While Chief Inspector George was speaking with the victim's wife, his assistant, Inspector Jacob, was speaking with the victim's neighbors. Robert, the victim's neighbor, said he was awake at the time and waiting for the Champions League replay to begin. He was a football fanatic. He had also had a bit too much to drink that day. He said it was around 2:30. He said he heard noises and looked out the window, seeing two people running out of the yard and getting into a white car and driving away. Commissioner Jacob asked if he was sure of the time. The neighbor was certain. Jacob went over to the chief inspector. He said one of the witnesses was sure it was 2:30, but the report was made at 2:50. There was a 20-minute difference. Why had she waited so long to report it? The chief inspector continued talking to the woman. He asked why she had reported it so late, since one of the neighbors had said the incident happened at 2:30. He added that if she was hiding something, she could get into trouble, and that she should tell everything truthfully. Emily. She said she didn't know how much time had passed or when she had called the police. The woman was stunned when she saw her husband like that, not knowing what to do. She wanted to scream. She wanted to speak. But she couldn't. She said her husband had said he was cold, that she had run to the house to get a blanket and covered him with it. It was as if her mind had gone blank. She kept telling him it would pass. It would pass. Her husband looked at her. For the last time. She didn't know what to do. The chief inspector directed the woman to other police officers to have her statement taken in writing. The woman's clothes were taken as evidence. They hadn't found a weapon at the scene. The chief inspector said the victim had left the house with a stick. He asked the crime scene investigation team to search for that stick. The deputy commissioner spoke with another neighbor of the victim. The victim's next-door neighbor, Carly, said, "He didn't want to get into trouble by calling the police. He said the victim's stick was very famous, known throughout the neighborhood, and that he fought with everyone. He said he never stepped out of the house without his stick, that there was an incident every day because of him, and that the police were constantly in the neighborhood. He added that the victim wasn't a well-liked person and couldn't get along with anyone. Therefore, nobody wanted to interfere in his affairs. They stayed away from him." The statements at the scene weren't enough to shed light on the incident. However, the statement of one of the neighborhood residents provided an important clue for the investigation. One of the night shift workers, who was passing by the scene at the time, didn't know the exact time, but it was around 3 o'clock. A white car sped past him, but he couldn't get the whole license plate number. It ended in 23 or 28. He couldn't see the rest. It was very dark. The chief inspector and his assistant reviewed the witness statements they had. They requested that the CCTV footage from the surrounding area be examined.
Evidence doesn't forget, doesn't give up, doesn't surprise, and doesn't fear. Evidence doesn't lie. Therefore, it's far more valuable than witness statements like "I did it" or "I saw it." The forensic experts would examine the shoe prints, and they would speak. The forensic experts would examine the stains, and they would speak. The blanket would speak, sooner or later, but they would certainly speak.
The chief inspector read Emily's written statement. In her written statement, she said her husband had mistreated her. When what she said in her written statement contradicted what she said to herself, he took her into the interrogation room. The officer asked the woman why she hadn't mentioned her husband's mistreatment when they first spoke. Emily replied, "You wouldn't understand because you're not a woman. We had a life, good or bad. Now everything is ruined. Do you think my parents would agree to me staying here without my husband? I'll have to go back to my parents' house, and things will be much worse after that." Meanwhile, the deputy commissioner was speaking with the doctor, examining the victim's wounds. The doctor stated that the weapon was definitely not sharp. It could have been a skewer, screwdriver, or pen. It wasn't sharp like a knife because it had torn the skin upon entry. Apart from that, no signs of physical assault were found. Jacob asked if a woman could have done this, but if so, she must have been strong and large. Killing the victim in this way would require strength. The doctor added that alcohol was found in her blood, but this was already known. According to his wife, he never went a night without drinking. Based on the shoe prints near the body, they speculated on the number of attackers, their genders, and the shape and size of their shoes. One turned out to be a sneaker, the other a boot. They also determined the shoe sizes. Judging by the depth and size of the prints, it was a man. Nothing was found in his wife's slippers or nightgown. The blanket examination revealed that all the bloodstains belonged to the victim. All the bloodstains at the crime scene also belonged to the victim. There was no blood of the killer at the crime scene, but there was plenty of evidence to prove his presence, and the chief inspector knew it very well. All white vehicles in the area were being searched. Only the last 10 vehicles, ending in 23 or 28, remained. Then they received a phone call that the vehicle they were looking for had been found. They went to meet with the owner. George began questioning Mason Garcia, the owner of the vehicle. He asked where he had been that evening, who he had been with, and if there were any witnesses or evidence. Mason replied, he was at home. He had neighbors. They had been sitting together watching a game, and their wives had been chatting in the kitchen. They hadn't used the car at all. It was parked in the back of the house. The chief inspector asked if anyone else had access to the vehicle. because the vehicle had been caught on CCTV cameras around 3 a.m. last night. Mason thought for a moment and said that his nephew, Noah, occasionally stole the car without permission, and then brought it back. When the chief asked where his nephew was, Mason said he hadn't come to work today and was probably at home. He was a lazy kid and had been absent from work many times. The chief inspector and his deputy went to the neighbors where Mason had been with the night. The neighbors confirmed they had been with the car owner and his family until late into the night. The only explanation for how the white car was captured on CCTV near the victim's house that night was that Noah had secretly taken the car. The chief inspector went to Noah's house to speak with him. The chief inspector told Noah that the car he used the previous night had been caught on CCTV. But Noah said he had been home all night, that he was with a friend, and that they had been watching a movie together. Witness statements and collected evidence pointed to two men who had driven away in a white car with license plate number 23. Without hesitation, the chief inspector took the two suspects to the police station for questioning. The white car with license plate number 23 was also taken in for examination.
Sometimes sperm, urine, and bloodstains are invisible to the naked eye. The good thing is that all three can be seen under ultraviolet light. That's why crime scene investigators always have these light sources. It's possible to make even wiped-away bloodstains visible. Luminol is a tool that works for this. The commissioner thought, finding bloodstains in the car is good. And if the DNA profile matches the deceased, then we've finished the job.
The suspects were questioned simultaneously. Noah was told that there were bloodstains in the car, but the young boy said the car wasn't his and that his uncle should be questioned. They had glue marks on their hands, indicating they had been peeled off. When asked why these marks were there, he said he and his uncle worked in an electrical workshop, and that's where they were. Ethan, a friend of the suspect, was just crying and repeatedly saying he hadn't done anything and that they were at home. They couldn't get any information from either suspect. They weren't talking. A search of the young men's home yielded numerous pairs of pants and shirts. Also seized were muddy boots and sportswear. They took his shoes too. The murder weapon, the stick, was still missing. The search continued. They suspected there was DNA belonging to the killer on the stick. Therefore, the killers might have taken the stick with them.
Soil is an extraordinarily strong piece of evidence. The particle size, the minerals it contains, the plant, animal, and fungal remains are all specific to the place where it is found. The soil residue on the suspect's boot perfectly matched the residue in the victim's garden. Moreover, a significant portion of the shoe prints in the garden originated from this boot. There was no doubt that the suspect had entered this garden. The stains on the suspect's pants, sneakers, and boots were blood. Each of their DNA profiles perfectly matched the victim's DNA profile. Suspicion is the most fundamental characteristic of a good police officer. The chief inspector thought that these young men might be the ones who attacked the victim, unless, of course, someone else wore their clothes that night.
When the clothes taken from the young people's house were examined in detail by experts, blood stains were found on them. The stains were sparse and fine-grained. This indicated that they had been very close to the victim during the murder. However, this did not prove that they had committed the murder. They still needed the murder weapon. The chief inspector thought that the shape of the bloodstains on these clothes was important. He knew that experts in this field could determine the nature of the attack, the number of people involved, the nature of the weapon or object used, the relationship between the attackers, and even their proximity to the victim by looking at these shapes. Finally, the chief inspector had found evidence that would prove his suspicions. The DNA from the bloodstains found in the white car with license plate number 23 matched the DNA profile of the deceased. On the other hand, Reports from the laboratory proved that the two suspects were in that garden that night, but the murder weapon had still not been found. During Noah's interrogation, it was stated that the DNA taken from the vehicle belonged to the victim. When Noah said the car belonged to his uncle, that perhaps his uncle had cut himself somewhere, and that their blood types might be the same, Jacob became angry. He hated being made to look like a fool. Seeing the commissioner's anger, Noah became frightened and began to explain. That night, he and Ethan had watched a movie and drunk beer. Then they got hungry. They stole his uncle's car and went to their usual kebab shop. On the way back, Noah said he needed to urinate, and they went into a house's yard. They were drunk. He said the victim heard the noises, came downstairs, got angry, and came towards them, hitting Noah with a stick. Noah fell to the ground. He got up, pulled a screwdriver from his back pocket, and swung it at the victim, but missed. The victim hit the suspect a second time, and the screwdriver fell from his hand. As the victim, Noah, advanced towards him with a stick, his friend, standing nearby, picked up a screwdriver from the ground and stabbed him in the throat. They were terrified. They then got into a vehicle and fled. Following Noah's interrogation, Ethan was questioned. Ethan was asked about the location of the murder weapon. When told that the victim had killed him, Ethan denied it, saying he hadn't killed anyone, and that Noah had done it. He said Noah had taken the stick and the screwdriver. They had thrown the screwdriver out the window while driving. He said he hadn't seen the stick at all. After the investigation, Noah's workplace was re-examined. All the screwdrivers were examined one by one. The area around the workplace was thoroughly investigated. Finally, the murder weapon was found 100 meters from the workplace. No blood was found on the screwdriver, but dried blood was found when the handle was opened. Ethan's fingerprints were found on the screwdriver, and Ethan was arrested. The arrested suspect had not yet appeared before a judge, so the case file was not yet closed. During this time, the sought-after stick was found, and its examination began. The professor, continuing his investigations, found a volatile substance where the stick had broken. The chief inspector suggested it might have been glued back together, but when the professor stated that this glue was used in electrical work, the chief inspector remembered the glue residue on Noah's hands. They immediately went to Noah's workplace, and it didn't take long to find the glue. Noah wasn't there. He hadn't come in all day, and no one knew where he was. Meanwhile, the professor noticed sperm residue on the blanket covering the victim. This detail had not been investigated before. Only blood analyses had been conducted. Researchers, not expecting anything different since it had been brought from the bedroom, hadn't deemed it necessary to examine this. But the professor wanted to be sure. Something was bothering him. Analyses were initiated, and his suspicions proved correct. Noah's DNA was found in the sperm residue on the blanket. This situation revealed the whole truth. Realizing that Emily and Noah were in a relationship, the chief and his assistant immediately set off. First, they raided Noah's house, but no one was inside. Then they went to the victim's house. The belongings had been packed. Realizing they were about to leave the city, the chief inspector and his deputy immediately alerted other teams. Arrest warrants were issued for both suspects. They were both apprehended on an intercity bus. During questioning, they confessed everything. The victim was an alcoholic who constantly beat his wife, and she hated him. She had met Noah at work. Their relationship quickly progressed, and they began a relationship. Emily constantly talked to Noah about what David had done to her. They made a plan to get rid of David. The two suspects would enter the yard at midnight. The woman would send the victim out by claiming there was a burglar, making it look like a simple robbery. But there was a problem. The victim was very strong. So, the day before the incident, she met with him and gave him the victim's club. Noah broke the club and then glued it back together. That night, he took Ethan with him. Ethan was completely unaware of what had happened. David had attacked Noah with a stick in the yard, and Noah dodged, causing the stick to break against the metal bars. Seizing the opportunity, Noah stabbed David in the neck with a screwdriver. They then ran to the car and sped away. On the way, Noah wiped his fingerprints off the screwdriver, then, using the excuse that the car window wouldn't open, handed it to Ethan and told him to throw it out the window. This way, Ethan's fingerprints remained on the screwdriver. He then left the stick at his workplace. This would prove he had committed the murder. When Emily arrived, David was still alive. She leaned down beside him, looked at him, and remained indifferent to his cries for help. She simply watched him. After David took his last breath, she slowly walked back into the house and brought a blanket. She covered David with it. After making sure he was dead, she called the police. Until the police arrived, she cried, wrapped in the blanket, without knowing why she was crying. The chief inspector and his assistant, working in the homicide department, quickly solved the victim's murder thanks to the carefully followed evidence. Thus, they ensured justice was served. Emily was sentenced to 18 years for complicity in the murder, while Noah was sentenced to 25 years for premeditated murder.